Now, earlier today, we were meant to have Alastair Thompson with us. Alastair is the co-founder, I believe, of Scoop Independent News in New Zealand, which is a very large mainstream platform, but an independent outlet that served New Zealand for many, many years. He was unable to make it earlier on, so we're going to just talk to him now for about 20 minutes until we head into the rest of the scheduled program. Alastair, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You may need to try to project your voice a little bit.
Okay.
Welcome to the stream. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure. I'm sorry I missed you earlier. It was, yeah.
No problem. Alastair, I'll just start with a little story for you about what Scoop meant for me as an activist on the ground in New Zealand. We would periodically put out press releases to mainstream outlets across the country, but Scoop was the only outlet which 100% of the time published our press releases and our announcements. Why was that, and how is it that you came to be a part of that project?
So I was a political journalist, a little bit older than some of the people that you've had on your show, although not all of them, because there's obviously a bunch of this. This is just amazing, by the way. The Vigil is extraordinary. It's a wonderful celebration of journalism and celebration of Julian. I'm great and very honoured to be here. But I'll just briefly explain. So Scoop was, and the internet had just been invented in the early 90s, and in 1996 we decided that we wanted to set up a news website, and we thought, well, Parliament's full of information which is moving backwards and forwards amongst influential and important people, but it's not getting out into the mainstream, and so we decided to publish it all, and that's sort of where it started. And we're now 19 years old now. Well, actually, we had another site before Scoop, so we're about 22 years old, and we're still going strong, doing the same thing. But I mean, it's a hard road being in online publishing. It's a strange business.
I'm sure it is. I mean, you're dealing with competitors who have a lot more financial resources than you, certainly. And I personally believe less ethics quite often, which is what makes your service so important.
Yeah, I mean, the media has been in decline throughout my entire career for nearly 30 years. So there's been an ever shrinking amount of money available for the news media and the mainstream. So, I mean, having come from the mainstream, I have some sort of sympathy for the problems that they face. But I mean, I do understand the criticisms that are directed at them, because they do seem to have behaved in a very maladaptive way to the problems that they faced.
True, and I think WikiLeaks is the ultimate, answer. That's certainly the most revolutionary news service that we've seen worldwide. You were telling me earlier that Scoop had actually republished portions of Cablegate. Could you tell me a bit about that?
So, I mean, we followed WikiLeaks from when it first began, and published a bunch of their stuff and published various stories and stuff that from WikiLeaks journalists in the early days. And then Cablegate was released, and we decided to basically, I mean, there was some concern that when the cables were released, that the State Department would attempt to try and delete them. So we were among a bunch of sites that basically decided to publish it in full. And we just, I mean, it's inside our database, so there's 150,000 cables, all fully searchable and available inside our database, which is quite fascinating, because you can sort of like find news events and then go and look for them and try and find out what was happening inside the State Department at the time.
And is that the primary motivation for why you decided to take that risk and to publish those cables, is from a transparency perspective?
Yeah, well, we thought the publication of the cables was very, very important, and I mean, we had taken a very, very strong view against the war in Iraq, and I mean the lying that took place in the lead up to the war, and I mean the astonishing level of sort of of media involvement in that lying. I mean, they pretend now that they were opposed to it or that they were thinking otherwise, but I mean at the time they were just cheering for war in an appalling manner. And I mean, Chelsea Manning's, I mean, he was just so brave to do what he did, and it would just have been terrible if the State Department had managed to shut it down, which they didn't. But I mean, what they've subsequently done to Julian is just unbelievable.
Absolutely, and there's been so few media voices in New Zealand who have been willing to speak out about that. We've had probably one of our most internationally recognised and famous investigative journalists, Nikki Hager, who has consistently worked with WikiLeaks and so consistently advocated for a WikiLeaks publishing mission. But he is one of I could count, I think, on less than one hand the number of New Zealand journalists who have thrown their lot in with WikiLeaks and with Julian Assange.
Yeah, but as other people have pointed out, it doesn't stop people using their material. I mean, the reason that Julian is sort of now currently sort of unfashionable and doesn't really get any support is because of his association with Donald Trump. Which wasn't really an association with Donald Trump, it was an association with the emails that they leaked during the election. And I mean, those emails led to the resignation of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the campaign manager for Clinton's campaign. And they proved to be entirely accurate. And then subsequently, I mean, Donna Brazil came out and explained how appallingly, I don't know, manipulative the Clinton campaign had been in terms of basically making it impossible for Sanders to ever win. I mean, it was and I mean, and I don't think we would have had much visibility about that if it hadn't been for WikiLeaks. I mean, even in the 2016 election, I mean, maybe people feel as though that played negatively towards Clinton in the election, and that he's therefore somehow responsible for the election of Trump, which is absurd.
It's very interesting to me to watch the various narratives that are pushed about WikiLeaks. We're told that they're irresponsible and don't redact information, and yet there has been multiple examples of them, in fact, redacting information. As if you search at Suzie 3D WikiLeaks redact on Twitter, you'll see screenshots of various WikiLeaks documents where they have redacted information to protect people. So that is a total fallacy. Another narrative that we hear all the time is that, oh, they published on Clinton, but they didn't publish on Trump. And yet, when I started delving into those Clinton files, what I found was huge amounts of damaging information about Trump, including information around his super PACs and funding and donors to the Trump campaign. There was all of the internal documentation of Trump campaign that Clinton had managed to obtain was published within the DNC leaks. It was sitting there waiting for anybody to find it, but they preferred to just say that WikiLeaks had targeted Clinton and that Trump was somehow protected, when in fact Trump's campaign was also exposed within that publication. I mean, I recorded dozens more major smears against WikiLeaks in my recent article, Being Julian Assange. I'm not sure if you've read that. It's pretty much an epic 23,000 word breakdown of all of the narratives about it is almost a book. It is almost a book. I tried to resist it becoming a book, but some people did in fact publish it as a PDF book for download. But the point there was that and time again, when I studied the narratives and looked into the true history of WikiLeaks, I discovered that in fact they were false. They don't stand up to the scrutiny. But it seems that people don't put the time and effort in to perform that scrutiny. And why is that? Do you think it's too laborious an undertaking or too easy to just regurgitate what they hear from the mainstream?
I think at some point WikiLeaks started to be taken for granted because it was providing such a useful service that, and people sort of felt that it was, they wanted, I mean, because their work was being produced out of material which they had obtained from WikiLeaks, they didn't really want to credit WikiLeaks. And then a bunch of other organizations started turning up, and they then received leaks directly, some of them. I mean, the Committee for the Centre for Investigative Journalism in particular. And I mean, perhaps because WikiLeaks was an organisation that was staffed in many parts by volunteers, they felt sort of an elitist looking down their noses at WikiLeaks or something. I mean, I don't know that WikiLeaks ever really got the credit that it deserved for what it was doing. But I mean, it is utterly vital. I mean, it's more vital now than it's ever been, because you have investigative journalism is getting more and more difficult. I mean, it really is only possible through leaks. It's the time journalists don't have the ability to do the old school sort of shoe leather sort of, I don't know, creation and creating contact networks and sort of the Seymour Hersh sort of style of journalism is, I mean, it's out of the range of anybody's resources these days. Whereas, and in those circumstances, WikiLeaks is a perfect intermediary, which makes it possible for independent journalists to do material, to do things. And I mean, one of the tragedies of the media these days is, and in fact, it's probably always been the case, is that it's enormously uncooperative. That basically everybody or every publication regards every other news publication as sort of a mortal enemy. I mean, it's sort of slightly less so during the Trump campaign for some reason, but I mean, I think that's because they all being attacked by Trump. But that inability to cooperate means that WikiLeaks has played a very, very useful role to join all those publications together and enable them to cooperate on big stories.
Which is a model that we've then seen being employed independently of WikiLeaks, for example, Panama Papers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you talk about the material that's left on the table. No one's ever really done the proper work that's required to analyse Cablegate. And I mean, a lot of the academic institutions, which you might expect to look at this material, they sort of either have ethical problems or they have political problems within their institutions about using leaked material. I don't know. We live in a very stupid world.
And by taking that position, by doing so, they are in fact committing acts of censorship. Because when they are convincing their employees or their associates, not to source this material, not to use this material, ultimately it is the public who they're restricting the access to. I think it's a really great point you made when you said just before that you don't think that those publications have been fully explored. I think that's particularly true of the GI files, the Stratfor releases. And I assume, the volume of the material is one factor, but certainly the, corporations, government, even academia, these people are incentivized not to use WikiLeaks material and not to delve into it. And to a certain extent, also, the same thing is true of the Snowden files. So the Decipher You project I've been working on, we have just had dozens of unique findings simply by reading Snowden documents that were already publicly available, that are already sitting online. Anybody could read it, anybody could do the work, anyone could make the discoveries, but it hadn't been done. And so how do we educate people to to do that work? How is it? Just lead by example, just projects like Decipher You, build our own research communities, or how do we inspire people to actually read the documents?
Well, I mean, maybe something will come out out of Julian's eventually being freed, and of this campaign. Because I mean, what the Ecuadorean Embassy has done to Julian, hardly anybody knows about this. It's almost invisible, as you say. I mean, people do realise that he's. I mean, I just had to look up some of the information myself just now. That people don't realise that he's being held in solitary confinement in this embassy, and he can't get out. And I mean, who's covering it other than RT? Is the Guardian covering it?
And well, the Guardian tends to write like 5 or 6 hit pieces on Julian, and then they allow someone to write one op-ed in support of him, and that seems to be about the ratio that they operate under.
Yeah, I mean, my personal view is that he. I mean, you've been sending messages to him. My personal view is that he should leave the embassy and let the British justice system defend him.
And do you think that the British justice system would defend him? I mean, the court case that he just had in February, I believe, of this year, was adjudicated by a woman whose husband is not just a woman, actually, a member of virtually the British nobility, whose husband is a profiteer, a war profiteer. I mean, he's in with BAE Systems, he's in with all of he is a part of the deep state. They are a part of the deep state, and this is who you're dealing with in the UK judiciary. We've seen the UK Crown Prosecutor Service involved in all kinds of underhanded dealings across the last 8 years in Julian's case, in complete contravention to the law and to legal process in the UK. So what makes you think that he will be served by...
The Swedish case is gone now. I mean, and I mean, the original thought was that Sweden would have been a much easier place to extradite him to the States from. So I mean, in fact, that's why that case was sort of magicked up in the first place, was because the British justice system, the due process is more reliable. And I don't think he would be held in custody. I don't think that a judge would decide he's not a flight risk. Not if he's waiting for an extradition case, a proper extradition case to be held. And I think that the British justice system and political authorities and even the press might, at that point, the media would then have to start defending it. He would be able to speak, starters, but it would then become an issue of, do you really want to hand Julian Assange over to Jeff Sessions and Mike Pompeo and the CIA under Trump after? I mean, the irony of that would just be too much for anyone to bear.
I think from a security standpoint, if anything, that he... I mean, let's look at what's happened in the last 2 years. I need to wrap this up. Well, they actually can. They actually can. It's not at all out of the realms of possibility that they would extrajudicially assassinate him. It's not at all out of the realms of possibility. So we have seen black-clad cat burglar type men scaling with suction cups the walls of the embassy. We have seen envelopes with white powder being delivered to Julian. The root canal that his doctors say he's needed now for the last nearly 3 years and has been unable to receive was the result of hard pieces of metal being inserted into his food in Wandsworth prison in the UK deliberately to break his teeth. We look at, there are countless journalists associated with WikiLeaks who have been murdered. There are lawyers, like the 2 Kenyan lawyers associated with WikiLeaks, who have been murdered. The death toll on WikiLeaks supporters is suspiciously high by comparison to any other publication. I think the scale of the opposition to WikiLeaks is beyond the point where we could simply just say, yeah, the courts will work it out and everything will be fine.
I'm not saying that. But I'm saying I think something should be planned. But I mean, I think leaving him where he is.
I agree, it's untenable for him for his current situation. I do agree that that's untenable. However, I don't believe that he is any safer outside of that embassy than he is inside of the embassy. And there's a great deal of reasons to believe that. And I'd just also point out that Stefania Maritzi's FOIA request results that came back heavily redacted from the UK Crown Prosecution Service exposed that it was the UK Crown Prosecution Service that was behind the extending the Swedish case for the last 5 years, preventing the Swedish from coming to interview Julian in the embassy, and the UK has been actively involved in subverting justice in his case for the best part of a decade.
Mostly under Obama, though.
Well, I don't think, the threats against Julian have been just as severe under Trump than being under Pompeo. I don't think there's been any substantial easing whatsoever. So it's ironic that on one side the media posture WikiLeaks and Julian as having been pro-Trump, and in the meantime Trump is doing absolutely everything he can to undermine Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and I would go so far as to say to meaningfully endanger him. And we've had a number of pro-Trump supporters on this vigil saying exactly that, and in fact calling Trump out for him decrying fake news but failing to protect real news. So
I think one of the weird things there is that, Trump doesn't. What did he say about he likes pilots who don't get caught? It's at the point at which Julian, Trump doesn't like people that are in weak positions. He likes Kim Jong-un, he likes Putin, he likes Erdogan. He likes sort of fellow autocratic fascist leaders, and he doesn't care about anybody that helps him. That's abundantly clear. I don't think there's very much chance of him coming to Julian's rescue. But I do think that I think this Vigil thing is extraordinary. I think that it's sort of like it's exponentially growing. And at this rate, the next one's going to be, I don't know, 60, 70 hours long.
We're looking at 50. I'd like to cap it at 50 for the next one, but we'll see how we go.
But also, I think there's a possibility that this will break the bubble. Like it'll break the silence on this issue. And the world is so crazy at the moment, and I think a lot of people, a lot of members of the public, if they really think about it, would realize that we need something like WikiLeaks now more than ever. If we're going to go into a world where we've got a bunch of fascists who are basically clamping down on freedom of speech and arresting journalists and killing people, blah-de-blah-de-blah, then organizations like WikiLeaks, a much, much stronger WikiLeaks is what is required.
I think that's absolutely brilliant summation. You're right. It is absolutely vital. And the attacks on WikiLeaks are ultimately attacks on the public right to know.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's been a great.
You're so welcome, Alastair. I look forward to bringing you on for a full hour next vigil. That would be really great to have you and to hear more from you.
I really enjoy it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.